Hello everyone, welcome to a 2024 presidential election video. Today, we will be covering a hypothetical between former President Donald Trump and incumbent President Joe Biden, who appear to be the most likely candidates. As you can see, I've already filled out the safe states. As for me, I used the margins of 15 plus safe, 5 plus likely, 1 plus lean, and anything below 1 is tilt. I filled the current states out as safe already because they were over 20 in the last election. However, that does not mean that there may not be more safe states. In order to determine that, I will be using Race to the White House polls. The reason I chose them is due to their historical accuracy. In 2022, they predicted 97.1% of Senate races correct. That is more than any other serious analysis. As for House races, they were the second best, only beat out by 538. In governor's races, they tied 538 for the amount correct. Due to their significant historical accuracy, they are the ones that I have decided to use. So let's begin. The first state that we will cover is Georgia. Georgia is a massive, massive swing state. It had voted Republican in every election since 1996 until Biden flipped it in 2020. Here we can see on their average that Biden leads by 1.2%. This would have us rate it a lean margin. If Biden can carry Georgia again, that would be very significant to his campaign, as it is a very large state, very swingy state, and a Republican really cannot win without winning Georgia. The next one that we will cover is going to be Kansas. Kansas currently is Trump plus 12. That is likely. The reason that this state is significant, which many people would count it off, is because of how left trending it is. A few cycles ago, this state was voting R plus 20. In 2020, Trump only won it by R plus 14.9. Now it's down to R plus 12. This shows its significant leftward shift, and while we probably won't see it vote blue for many cycles, it's still important to note how it is trending. I'd also like to cover Nebraska and, if it has it, its districts. Nebraska 1 does not have any polls, however, it is rated safe R, so I will give that a safe R rating. Nebraska 2 are no polls, and it is rated competitive. Due to that, I'm going to say lean, because Biden won it by a likely margin in 2020, but due to it being no polls, I'm not ready to say likely. Nebraska overall is no polls either. However, this state was safe in 2020, and due to that, I'm going to rate it likely, just because no polls, I'm not ready to quite say it's safe again, due to it not matching the 20 plus margin set earlier. Next up, we're going to cover Minnesota. Minnesota is Biden plus 9.5. That would be a significant improvement from the 2020 margins where Biden only won by around 7.1. Next up, Iowa. Iowa has been a historic swing state, but in recent election cycles has trended massively towards the Republican Party. According to this, Trump is up by 5.4. That would be likely. However, 5.4 is a significant decrease from where he was at only a few years ago, 3 to be exact, where Trump won by 8. Next up, let's do Missouri. Missouri is R plus 16.5. That's a safe rating. That should be a surprise to nobody. Missouri, long time ago, was a very swingy state, but ever since 2012, Democrats have not had a lot of luck here. Next up, we'll cover Louisiana. Louisiana, current polls show Trump up 15 plus 1. So we will rate that as a safe margin. However, it's worth noting that that is an improvement for President Biden as compared to his 2020 numbers. Next up, we'll cover Montana, which is 13.1 and likely, which is an improvement from 2020. And that's a big deal because Montana has an incumbent Democrat up for re-election in 2024. If Biden can shave off Trump's margin, that could significantly help Senator Jon Tester win re-election. Next up, we're going to cover the West Coast, the best coast. Currently, Biden is ahead by 16.1 in Washington. That is a bit of a decrease from his 2020 margin where he won by about 19. However, it is an improved margin from 2012, which saw a very big Democratic win. Next up, we have Oregon, which is also 16 plus 8. This shows that the West Coast is solidly behind Biden, but that should be no surprise. It's been solidly behind every Democratic candidate for a very long time. Next up is Nevada. This is a very key swing state that Biden won by 2% in 2020, where Hillary Clinton also won by 2% in 2016. This shows Biden up by 0.5. Now, Nevada has been trending right for some time, I'd say since 2012, and so it should be no surprise to anybody that this will be a competitive and very close state. Next up, we're covering Arizona. This state hadn't voted blue since 1996 until Biden won it in 2020. It currently has a Democratic governor, a Democratic senator, 2 Democratic senators actually, and also important to this, Biden is winning here by a much larger margin than he did in 2020. That could be very key to flipping the legislature there, which will be up for election in 24. Anyways, that would be a lean D race. Next up, New Mexico. Likely. That should be no surprise to anyone. That state has been likely since 2008. Next up, Colorado. D plus 11.6. That is a little bit of a decrease from his 2020 margin, which actually comes as a shock to me as Democrats in Colorado in the 2022 elections performed very, very well. Next up is Texas, where Trump currently only leads by 1.8%. That is a very big deal. Texas was once the golden child of the Republican Party, but in recent years has begun to trend left. In 2020, Trump won it by 5. In 2016, Trump had won it by 9. And in 2012, Mitt Romney had won it by 15%. It going down to 1% would make it one of the most competitive states in the nation, which could spell a significant trouble for the Republican Party. Next up, we have the all-famous Rust Belt, starting with Wisconsin. Currently, this has Biden up by 7.7%. As we know, polls have a long history of overstating how well Democrats will do in Wisconsin, so I will not be rating that election as likely, simply because I cannot trust the polls in Wisconsin due to their historical inaccuracy in both 2016 and 2020. Therefore, I will give this a lean rating, as 7.7 is a very large margin, too large for the polls to be completely off, but I don't think they are going to be quite right on that margin. Next up is Illinois, which has Biden up by 11.2. That is an incredibly small margin for Illinois, as the last election, Joe Biden won it by 17%. So that would be a massive decrease. As a matter of fact, that would be less than the incumbent governor, J.B. Pritzker, won re-election by in 2022, which would spell some trouble for Illinois Democrats if they're really underperforming that bad. Next up is Michigan, where Biden leads by 1.6. Michigan polls were pretty accurate in the 2022 election. Of course, they were off in 2016 and 2020. However, I am going to trust the record of race to the White House and how 22 polls went in Michigan and rate that as a lean D race. Next up, Indiana. This has no polls, but it was safe in 2020. However, it was not so safe that I'm willing to rate it safe again without any polling numbers, so I will put it likely, similar to the situation in Nebraska overall. Next up, we have Ohio, once the biggest and most critical swing state, no longer so much. Here, Trump is up by 7.5. That is very similar to his 2020 and 2016 margins. However, it is a little bit less, which could also really help Democrats, because if Biden can shave off Trump's margin from 2020, that could significantly help incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown win re-election, which will be a tight race as he faces off in a state that has not voted for a Democrat since 2012 on the presidential level. Next up, we have the most important state right now in politics, Pennsylvania. It let Democrats expand their control in the Senate last year. It is the birth state of incumbent President Joe Biden and is absolutely necessary to any campaign that wants to win. Currently, Biden's up here. That is a very close margin. If I'm not mistaken, that is a little less than what Biden actually won it by in 2020, which could be some bad news. However, I'm not sure as it's very close. Next up, New Hampshire. New Hampshire has Biden up by 7.9, which is nearly identical to his 2020 margin, and New Hampshire also gives him a victory with 271 electoral votes. So as we can see, Biden will be reelected. However, we have a few more states to cover. New Hampshire used to be a very close swing state, and sometimes it still is. However, on the presidential level, it has become more and more Democratic ever since. In Maine, currently, we have no polls in either Maine 1 or Maine 2. Maine 2 was likely in 2020 and 2016. However, since there are no polls there, I'm going to rate it as leaning similar as we did to Nebraska District Number 2. Maine overall does have some polls, which has Biden up by 12.3. That's a very impressive margin and a little bit above his 2020 margin, if I'm not mistaken, which I believe he won by 9. Next up, Virginia. Virginia is Biden plus 11.1. That is an improvement for Joe Biden, which could be kind of considered shocking as in 2021, Virginia completely turned around from its 2020 margin where it voted for Biden by 10% and then elected Republican Glenn Youngkin by a little over 1%. So it's very interesting to see how Biden is actually outperforming his 2020 performance in Virginia, despite the fact just a few years ago it seemed that they turned all around and voted for Republican for the first time since 2010, if I'm not mistaken. Next up, we have North Carolina. This was the closest Trump state in 2020, and Biden, the campaign, has announced that they will be fighting hard for this state. As a matter of fact, it was only a few days ago that both President Biden and Vice President Harris were here talking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The Biden campaign has made sure that this will be a prime target for flipping the 2020 election. However, North Carolina has not voted for a Democrat at the presidential election since 2008, and the polls currently have Donald Trump up here. And so I believe that it will go to Donald Trump as of now. Of course, we are over a year away from the presidential election. A lot can change. However, for now, we will rate it as lean Republican. Next up is South Carolina. South Carolina, it's a likely our state, always has been, always will be. Not much discussion to have there. However, Florida, this is a very important state. In 2020, it was the second closest Trump state, and it has been one of the most accurate predictors of elections until 2020, where it voted for incumbent Donald Trump. However, Biden won. It took a massive swing right in 2022, leading people a lot to believe that it will lose its swing state status. However, polls here only show that Trump is leading by 3.6%. That is not this massive swing that many were expecting. I have a very unpopular opinion about Florida, and that's that there is a strong chance it will swing left. As of right now, I'm unsure if it will. But Florida has always had a history of swinging towards the incumbent president. You can look back at nearly every election after Jimmy Carter, and it has almost always swung towards the incumbent president, which leads me to believe that Trump genuinely could get a 3.6 margin here. I don't think Biden will win it. I do think it's a little too far gone for that. However, I don't know if we should consider it non-competitive at all anymore. Of course, Republicans had a very good year there in 2022. And polls in Florida often do overestimate Democrats. So, however, I think I will give this a likely rating, which is just 2 points more than what Race to the White House gives them, and a 2-point overperformance for Republicans in Florida from the polls is not that crazy. Next up, we have Alabama. which, sorry, no, we already had Alabama covered. Mississippi. Mississippi is safe R. Not really surprising. The last time it wasn't safe R was 2012 under President Barack Obama. Next up, we're going to go New Jersey, which has no polls. It was safe in 2020, but not over 20 points, so I'm not comfortable enough saying it will be safe again. So we will rate this as likely. That puts Biden up to 300 electoral votes, almost matching his 2020 results of 306. Next up, President Biden's home state, Delaware. Once again, no polls. It was safe in 2020, and I'm thinking about making it likely. However, it's also President Biden's home state and voted D plus 19 in 2020. So therefore, due to it being so close to that 20% threshold and being President Biden's home state, I will once again rate it as safe. Last but not least, we have Alaska, which has no polls. It was likely in 2020, and I believe it'll be likely again, just because that state has been likely for every election since 2012, and I struggle to see that changing anytime soon. So here are the current ratings. I want to note that a lot can change in this time, and this is not my future prediction, just my ratings if the election were held today, as a lot could change, and that is stuff we don't know. However, if you look at this map, you'll see it's very similar to the 2020 map. As a matter of fact, it's the exact same, except Biden has 3 less electoral votes due to reapportionment. As of right now, it looks like Biden would win re-election if the election was held today. However, we have over a year left and so much can change. So I will keep updating this as we get new information and as we get closer to the election. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time. Goodbye.